Hi, I'm Kira. And the last time I came home, I didn't even make it to the porch before my sister-in-law hurled my daughter's backpack into the street and screamed, "Get out, you filthy leeches!" My mother stood frozen, silent, watching it all. They'd been planning this, plotting it, while smiling to my face. But I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just smiled, pulled out my phone, and made one quiet call. And the moment she realized who really owned the house, her voice vanished. So tell me, have you ever been pushed so far, so many times, that when you finally push back, it feels like peace? Stick around. This isn't just about a house. It's about truth, and how silence can be a weapon sharper than rage. The sun was dropping behind the roofs as I turned onto our street, the kind of heavy Houston afternoon that made the air feel thick enough to chew. I had just picked up Yoria from school, and she was half asleep in the back seat, her backpack resting against her legs. I'd finished my morning shift at the clinic, squeezed in a grocery run, and still had my evening bookkeeping job waiting for me later. Most days felt like a long string of responsibilities, tied together with whatever patience I had left. But as we rolled closer to the house, something in the air changed. The neighborhood usually hummed with the familiar sounds of lawnmowers, kids tossing basketballs, the occasional dog barking at a squirrel. Today, it was strangely quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you sit up a little straighter. I noticed cars parked in odd angles along the curb, more than usual, and my stomach tightened without a clear reason. By the time we turned the corner, the reason appeared all at once. My belongings, my actual belongings, were scattered across the front lawn like someone had shaken the house upside down. Clothes draped over the hedges, drawers tossed open on the driveway, boxes overturned with papers spilling out. Yorha's backpack was torn down the side, its contents strewn like trash. "Mom," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. I reached back and squeezed her hand. "It's okay. Stay close to me." But my breath was stuck somewhere deep in my chest. Shock isn't just an emotion. It hits like a physical blow, a sudden drop inside your ribcage. I stepped out of the car and tried to shield Yora as best as I could, though no amount of shielding could hide the mess. Then I heard her voice. "Look who finally decided to show up," Delphi shouted from the porch, arms crossed, eyes blazing with a kind of triumph that made my skin prickle. "Get out, both of you. I'm done supporting leeches." Her voice carried down the street, loud enough for anyone within 2 blocks. She jabbed a finger toward me, then toward my daughter, as if pointing out something dirty. "You two have been living off us long enough. Pack your junk and go." It had been years since someone had made me feel small, but suddenly I was 12 again, standing in my father's garage, being told I was lucky to have a roof at all. Delphi had a way of reaching into the cracks of old wounds without even trying. I spotted my mother, Sable, standing near the mailbox. She looked frozen, hands tucked together, shoulders trembling. She wasn't siding with Delphi, but she wasn't stepping in either. Fear had always kept her still. Then something caught my eye on the ground. A small sky blue handkerchief, the one Yoria used during her spring allergies. It was half buried in dirt, a tire mark across one edge. That tiny piece of fabric, so innocent, so personal, sent a different kind of ache through me. I bent down, brushed the dirt off, and slid it gently into my pocket. Behind me, Yoria whispered, "Why do they hate us?" I swallowed hard. "They don't get to decide who we are," I said quietly, though my voice wavered more than I wanted. The humiliation was sharp and hot, but beneath it was something sturdier, something rising. Delphi marched toward me, waving an envelope like it was a badge of authority. "This says you're done here. You overstayed. I'm calling the police if you don't leave now." Neighbors had begun peeking out from their porches, pretending to check mail or water plants just so they could watch. My cheeks burned, but I kept my back straight. I could have yelled. I could have thrown her words right back at her. But I'd learned over the years that volume doesn't equal power. People like Delphi won the moment by shouting, but they lost the war by never thinking ahead. So instead, I met her eyes and let a calm, unreadable smile settle on my face. That rattled her more than any argument would have. Inside, my thoughts finally aligned. I didn't have to fight here, not on her terms, not in the street, not in front of my daughter. I reached slowly into my bag, pulled out my phone, and scrolled to one number I rarely used, but always kept ready. Moxley, the property manager who handled all the legal paperwork for the house. A man who didn't choose sides, only facts. Facts that mattered today more than ever. He answered on the second ring. "Kira, everything all right? Can you stop by?" I asked softly. "It's important." He paused for only a moment. "On my way." I hung up. Delphi's eyes narrowed. "Who was that? What are you doing?" Her confidence wavered. She glanced at the mess on the lawn, then at my mother, then back at me, like she was trying to calculate something she hadn't considered before. I didn't say a word. A late breeze moved through the yard, stirring loose papers and lifting the corner of the blue handkerchief inside my pocket. I rested my hand over it instinctively. Moments later, a car turned into the driveway. Moxley stepped out, adjusting his glasses, looking between me and the chaos spread across the lawn. And just like that, all the color drained from Delphi's face. Delphi's breath caught in her throat, just a small hitch, but enough for me to notice. Moxley stepped up beside me, calm as ever, his tie slightly loosened but still straight, like nothing could shake him. He looked from the porch to the lawn, taking in the mess without a flicker of emotion. Then his eyes landed on Delphi. She shifted her weight, arms still crossed, chin raised, but her body tensed. I could see it in her stance. She hadn't expected this. Not a man in a blazer and polished shoes. Not someone with a clipboard instead of a badge. The neighbors who had been watching started disappearing into their houses one by one. Curtains drew back into place. The low murmur of lawn sprinklers took over again, almost mocking how ordinary the world kept spinning while my life had been dumped on the grass. I felt the evening heat thickening around us, not just from the weather, but from everything unsaid hanging in the air. The kind of tension you don't breathe through, you just stand in. Sable came toward me slowly, almost gliding like her feet didn't want to make noise. "Kira," she whispered, placing a hand lightly on my elbow. "Are you sure you want to push this?" I didn't turn to her, didn't blink. "I'm not pushing anything. She already did." Delphi scoffed, loud enough to reclaim attention. Moxley simply nodded and addressed her evenly. "Excuse me, ma'am. I need to speak to the property owner." Delphi let out a brittle laugh. "Then talk to Truitt. This is his house." Moxley turned his head to me with the kind of ease that said he'd done this before. "Kira, do you want to have this conversation privately, or should I go over it here?" Her laugh stopped mid-breath. She blinked. Once. Twice. "Go ahead," I said. Delphi looked like she'd swallowed something sharp. "Ma'am," Moxley continued, looking back at her, "this home has been legally registered in Kira's name for over 5 years. The deed was transferred before the previous owner passed, and all property taxes have been paid directly by her." She didn't move. "Everything's documented," he added. "It's not a matter of opinion." Delphi took a step toward him, voice sharp and shaking. "You've been manipulated. She manipulates people. You think you know her? She tricked an old man on his deathbed, played caretaker, and stole this place out from under us." I'd heard this story 100 different ways over the years, always with me as the villain, always with her as the victim. But this time, with Yoria standing nearby, watching everything. The words dug deeper. They weren't just lies, they were poison aimed at my daughter. Sable, behind me, started murmuring, "I'm sorry, I didn't want this. I didn't mean for it to come to this." She reached out to pat Delphi's arm. "Maybe we should just take a breath. This doesn't have to get ugly." I looked at her then. Really looked. Her eyes darted, her hands fluttered. She was trying to patch things, smooth over the moment like she'd done our whole lives. But peace built on silence doesn't last. It just delays the collapse. "You always say that," I said, not loud, but clear. "But some things are already ugly." Moxley cleared his throat gently and turned back to his clipboard. "The documentation is simple. Kira owns the house. There's no lease agreement with you or anyone else. And this," he nodded toward the lawn, "could be considered a breach of tenant conduct. Should we even classify you as a tenant?" Delphi's face turned bright red. "You're all being ridiculous." Then Truitt appeared. Barefoot, hair a mess, he stepped onto the porch blinking like he'd just woken from a nap he didn't ask for. "What's going on?" "She's trying to throw us out," Delphi snapped, jabbing her finger at me. "She brought some lawyer-looking guy to embarrass us in front of the neighborhood." Truitt looked at the lawn, at the overturned bins, at our childhood piano bench cracked open like a coffin. But not once did he look at me. He rubbed his face and mumbled something about needing aspirin, then stood beside Delphi like a shadow without its own shape. It was in that moment that something inside me stopped crumbling and started forming again. Not pride, not yet, but something sturdier. I reached into my pocket and felt the soft edge of Yorha's handkerchief, the one that had been crushed under muddy tire marks just an hour earlier. I ran my thumb over its seam and let myself breathe for the first time since we pulled into the driveway. And then Delphi did the unthinkable. "She's letting that kid run wild in the house," she snapped, glaring straight at Yorha. "Things have gone missing, broken. The place is a wreck because of her." My body reacted before my mind could catch up. "You don't speak to my daughter," I said, low and hard. "Not now, not ever again." Yorha's fingers slipped into mine, tight and silent. Delphi backed off half a step, like she hadn't expected me to bite back. Moxley stepped forward. "I'm going to need to inspect the inside of the home. Given the state of things, it's necessary to verify that no structural damage has occurred." "You can't just go inside," Delphi barked. "You need permission." Moxley was already flipping through papers. "Actually, I have it. From the owner." I nodded. Delphi turned to Truitt. "Are you just going to let them do this?" He shrugged. I don't know what's happening." She whipped toward the front door, hand on the knob. "No one goes in," she said. "This is my home, too." But something in her voice cracked. Just barely. But it was there. Moxley stepped forward. So did I. The porch light blinked on automatically, washing her in a harsh glow. And for the first time, I saw it. The real thing she'd been trying so hard to keep hidden. It wasn't power, it was fear. For a second, none of us moved. The porch light held Delphi in its flat glow, and whatever she'd been trying to project, authority, confidence, ownership, fell away just enough for me to see what sat underneath. Not strength, not pride, something far smaller. I didn't say anything. I just stepped past her, following Moxley as he walked toward the door. The light behind us softened as dusk settled in, stretching long shadows across the porch. The day hadn't ended yet, but it felt like we'd crossed into a different kind of night, one where truths stopped hiding. Truitt hovered near the doorway, rubbing his jaw, unsure whether to make room or shut the door. Delphi glanced between him and me, but she couldn't seem to steady herself. She huffed, muttered something under her breath, and finally stepped aside just enough for Moxley to enter. Inside, the house felt heavier than it looked. Thick air, dim lighting, a faint smell of something sour left too long in the trash. I hadn't been through here in a few days, but the disarray was new. Dishes with streaks of dried sauce piled in the sink. Clothes slumped over the couch instead of folded. A lamp near the hallway was cracked down the side, the bulb hanging loose. That lamp had been fine last week. Moxley walked slowly, eyes scanning everything with the kind of quiet, methodical interest that didn't require words. Delphi, however, had plenty of those. "Whatever you see, the kids did it," she insisted, waving a dismissive hand toward Yorha, who was standing near my mother like she wanted to disappear into her sweater. I didn't look at Delphi. I didn't need to. Her voice carried the same sharp tone as every accusation she'd thrown before. When her grocery receipt was short $5 and somehow became my fault, or when her garden tools went missing and she blamed my daughter without hesitation. It was a pattern carved deep into the bones of this family. Truitt swallowed hard when he finally noticed the broken lamp. "When did that happen?" he asked quietly. Delphi shot him a glare. "I told you, her girl is careless." My stomach tightened. I had expected lies. I just hadn't expected her to throw them this freely while my child stood right there, hearing every word. We moved down the hallway, and something in me shifted unexpectedly. My hand brushed against a dent in the wall, and a memory pulled itself forward like a thread tugging loose. 2 years ago, Delphi accusing me of scraping her car in the driveway. She'd pointed at me in front of neighbors, voice ringing through the street, insisting I finally admit it. I'd spent that whole night sick to my stomach, wondering if somehow the scrape had happened and I hadn't noticed. Only later did security footage show a loose shopping cart rolling across the parking lot at the grocery store where she'd gone earlier that day. She never apologized. She simply found a new thing to blame me for. My hand stayed on the wall for a moment longer before I let it fall back to my side. The house wasn't just cluttered. It was wearing the marks of 2 people who didn't take care of anything. Not their home, not their relationships, not their responsibilities. Behind me, I heard the soft shuffle of my mother's shoes. "Kira, honey, maybe we shouldn't stir things up," she murmured. "Just let it go. It'll only get worse if you push." Those words had shaped so much of my childhood. Let it go, stay quiet, keep peace, even if it means swallowing yourself whole. Hearing them now didn't soothe me. It hollowed me. I turned slightly, looking at her. "Mom, letting it go is how we got here." She blinked rapidly as if the sentence confused her. By the time we reached the kitchen, the light outside had dimmed further, washing the countertops in a shadowy blue. Piles of unopened envelopes sat near the microwave. Some had been torn open, others sat with stamps untouched. Moxley sifted through a few, his brow tightening. Then he paused and pulled out a letter, one addressed to me. The top of the envelope was ripped jaggedly open. Before he could speak, Delphi snatched it from his hand. "It wasn't important," she said quickly, waving it as if that would erase the truth. "It was just some notice about repairs or something." I knew exactly what it was. A maintenance alert, one that should have reached me weeks ago, one that never did. A chill spread through my chest, slow and steady. This wasn't just carelessness. She had been intercepting mail meant for me, information meant for me, decisions meant for me. Delphi looked away, and that tiny shift told me more than anything she'd said tonight. "It's not what it looks like," she snapped. "You're probably trying to twist this to make us look bad. That's what you do, Kira. You turn everything upside down and act like you're innocent." "I didn't open your mail," I said softly. "You didn't earn this house," she shot back, voice rising. "You didn't earn anything. You've always been the charity case." The words landed like punches, meant for an old version of me, one who kept apologizing for existing. But tonight, with my daughter clinging to my sleeve and the faint scent of old trash filling the kitchen, the words didn't break me. They clarified everything. All this time, she hadn't been trying to push me out of her home. She had been terrified of living in mine. Truett stood beside the fridge, shifting from foot to foot. He looked at the mess, the crack in the lamp, the letter in Delphi's hand. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in his eyes, not directed at me, but at her. A tiny fracture opening. Still, he didn't move toward me. That hesitation hurt more than anything Delphi had said. I reached into my pocket and touched Yoria's blue handkerchief. Soft cotton, light. A reminder of a moment that mattered. Something gentle in the middle, of chaos. It steadied me in a way I didn't expect. I remembered my father handing one to me after I cried the night before my first day of high school. "Keep it," he'd said. "It's proof you're stronger than you feel." That memory surfaced like a breath I had been holding for years. I lifted my head again, just as Delphi pointed a shaking finger at me. "You're trying to kick us out so you can play the victim. You think the neighbors will take your side? You want them to feel sorry for you?" Her voice rose purposefully, loud enough for anyone outside to hear. And for the first time all evening, I felt nothing resembling shame. Just resolve, clear and solid. Moxley closed the folder in his hands. "Kira," he said quietly, "we need to discuss next steps, privately." Delphi shoved herself between us, her breath quick, her hands trembling. "She isn't making any decisions here," she screamed, voice cracking on the last word. And in that moment, right then, I understood something that hit deeper than any insult she'd thrown. She wasn't fighting to keep a roof. She was fighting to keep control of the house, of the story, of the silence that had always protected her. But that silence wasn't hers anymore, not tonight. Delphi's voice still hung in the air, sharp and raw, like a wire stretched too tight. Moxley didn't flinch. He simply turned toward me and gave a small nod, motioning toward the back door. "Would you mind stepping outside with me for a moment, Kira?" Before I could move, Delphi lunged forward, ready to follow. But Truett, with a hand I didn't expect, caught her arm. "Just stop, Del," he said, low but firm. I turned to look at him, stunned. The man who never raised his voice, never intervened, never seemed to notice when things cracked. He stopped her. My brother, for the first time in what felt like decades, chose not to stay silent. I didn't let myself hope, not yet. But something flickered, not forgiveness, but the smallest flicker of, maybe, recognition. The screen door creaked as I stepped out into the backyard. The night had swallowed the last of the light, and the air was thick enough to press against my skin. Moxley followed me down the steps, his shoes crunching softly on the patchy grass. He didn't start right away. He stood beside me for a breath, maybe two, and when he finally spoke, his voice was lower, softer than I expected. "Kira," he said, "I know you already know this, but I need to say it plainly. There are multiple tenant violations here. Property damage, unpaid utilities, refusal to communicate. And what's worse, I found opened mail addressed to you. That alone is a legal issue." I kept my arms folded tight against my ribs. Not because I was cold, just trying to hold myself still. He paused, then added, "They've been exploiting you, for a while now." The words settled somewhere deep, in a place I hadn't looked at in years. Not because I didn't know, because saying it out loud meant I'd have to face it. And once you see something clearly, you can't pretend it was just shadows. I nodded, slow and shallow. "She made me think I was crazy," I whispered. "Like I was remembering wrong, like I was being too sensitive." He pulled out his phone, tapping the screen a few times. "I filed a courtesy inspection report a few months ago when I suspected something was off. You were listed as the primary contact. But this..." He turned the screen toward me. Was never followed up. My name, the property, the date of a missed inspection I never knew was scheduled. She intercepted it, I said quietly. Behind us, the screen door creaked again. I turned and saw my mother inching out onto the back steps. She'd heard us. Of course she had. I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding, she said quickly, both hands twisting together in front of her like she was praying. We don't need all this trouble. Families argue sometimes. That doesn't make it criminal. It hit me in the chest like a stone, not her words, but how familiar they were. The same sentence she used to whisper when I came home from school in tears. When I said someone had pulled my hair, taken my lunch, called me names. Her answer had always been, don't fight, don't yell, don't make it worse. She never stood between me and harm, just between me and conflict. And now she was doing it again. I didn't respond. I just looked at her. And maybe that was enough, because she looked away, murmuring something I couldn't quite hear. The screen doors slammed open so hard it bounced back and hit the siding. Delphi stormed out, arms rigid at her sides. This is pathetic, she snapped. Dragging some stranger out here to talk about our family like we're criminals. What's next, Kira? Gonna sue us for not thanking you enough? I let her rant. I was tired of being shocked by her performance. She pointed at Moxley. This is a private matter. You don't belong in it. Funny, I thought. When she threw my clothes into the yard for all the neighborhood to see, that wasn't private. That was discipline. But now that the story was shifting, suddenly it was personal business. I didn't move. And that's when the voice came from across the fence. Actually, someone said, he does belong. We turned. Mrs. Holcomb stood at the edge of her lawn, hands clasped in front of her, phone in hand. She'd lived across the street for as long as I'd known the neighborhood, quiet, sharp, a retired librarian who noticed everything. I've got footage, she said, of the day Kira's things were tossed, and I have something else. Delphi froze. Mrs. Holcomb hesitated, then added, a few weeks ago, you didn't know I was sitting on my porch. I recorded you yelling at that child, calling her a burden, telling her she'd ruined your peace. I felt Yorya's name pierce through the humidity like a knife. Delphi went pale. You had no right. I absolutely do, Mrs. Holcomb said. When you abuse people in plain sight, you lose your right to secrecy. The quiet that followed wasn't peace. It was stunned. Truitt walked out next. He looked smaller than I remembered, paler. His eyes moved from me to Delphi to the phone in Mrs. Holcomb's hand. He didn't say anything for a second. Then he whispered, Del, why? Why would you say that to her kid? Delphi turned on him like he'd slapped her. Don't you start. You think she's innocent? She's been manipulating this whole thing, playing the victim like she always does. But Truitt didn't answer. He looked at the grass as if it might tell him something he didn't already know. And something broke open inside me. Not anger, not yet. But something else. A boundary, maybe. One that had always been too soft. One that let guilt push down anything I knew to be true. For too long, I thought if I was kind enough, quiet enough, forgiving enough, maybe she'd soften. Maybe she'd see me. But silence had never protected me, had only made it easier for her to rewrite the story. Delphi grabbed Truitt's hand. She wants to ruin us. Don't you get it? She always has. I stepped forward, not fast, not loud, but steady. I never wanted to ruin anyone, I said, voice calm. I just stopped letting you ruin me. Even Moxley turned to look at me. Delphi stared like she didn't recognize the person speaking. Then Moxley cleared his throat. Kira, we need to discuss next steps, legally. The words hit harder than I expected, not because I wasn't ready, but because it meant the waiting was over. Delphi didn't move. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came. The porch light buzzed, flickering again, casting lines of shadow across her face, no longer angry, just stunned. And in that flickering light, I saw the terror of someone who finally realized their power was slipping away. Moxley didn't say anything right away. He just gave me a glance that felt like a question. "Are you ready for this?" But he didn't force me to answer. He started walking toward the driveway, and I followed without speaking. Behind me, Delphi's voice snapped through the dark like a whip, still clinging to every insult she could form in a hurry. "She's manipulating you," she yelled. "She's always had a way of twisting things." My mother's voice followed, softer but no less strained. "Delphi, honey, please. Stop. Just breathe." But her pleading didn't soothe anyone, least of all me. Every step toward the car felt heavier than the last. Not because of tonight, because of everything that came before it. Every moment I swallowed my truth. Every time I let something cruel slide because it wasn't worth the fight. I used to think I was keeping peace, but what I was really doing was letting people get used to hurting me without consequence. I reached my car, pulled the door open, and sank into the driver's seat. Moxley stayed just outside, his presence steady but respectful. I didn't turn the key. I didn't even close the door. I just let the quiet settle around me like a weighted blanket I hadn't realized I was carrying all my life. Then I lowered my head to the steering wheel, and for the first time that night, the tears came. Not the kind that beg for comfort, not the kind that want to be witnessed, just the kind that fall when something finally gives out. It wasn't sadness. It was too old for that. It was the unraveling of holding too much, for too long, in too many directions. My face was still pressed against the wheel when I heard Moxley's voice, low and cautious. "Kira, have you checked your voicemail lately?" I lifted my head slowly. "Voicemail?" He nodded. "From your old number, the one you had listed when you filed the deed paperwork." I fumbled with my phone, blinking back what was left of the tears, and pulled up the voicemail app. One new message, dated 2 months ago. I tapped it, put it on speaker. Delphi's voice cut through the night like broken glass. "I don't give a damn what Kira thinks. She's too soft to do anything anyway. She's always been useless. Always will be. If she thinks this house matters to her more than it does to us, she's more pathetic than I thought. And that daughter of hers, I'll make sure she learns her place." I froze. My hand went cold, the phone still in it. It wasn't the words, not exactly. It was the hate behind them, the casual venom, the certainty that I'd never stand up, that I never had it in me to push back. And maybe she wasn't wrong, until now. I sat there for a long second. Then I hit play again, and listened to it from the beginning. I wanted to be sure I wasn't imagining the contempt, the malice, the planning. Delphi wasn't careless. She was intentional. She always had been. And just like that, everything snapped into place. All the years she'd rewritten the narrative. All the times she framed me as the one with issues. All the family birthdays where I showed up with a gift and left with guilt. My breath steadied. The tears stopped. Not because the pain disappeared, but because clarity had finally shown up to stand beside me. I became aware of my fingers brushing something soft inside my pocket. The blue handkerchief, my father's. Before I could dwell too long, someone tapped on the window. I looked over. Mom. I rolled it down halfway. She leaned in, eyes darting toward the house, as if afraid someone might hear her whisper. "Maybe we should just forget this," she said gently. "You know how she gets." It took effort not to recoil. Her voice, quiet, nervous, pleading, was the same one that used to fill the kitchen when Dad raised his voice. When I cried about how Delphi treated me, when anything threatened to rock the boat she clung to like it was the only thing keeping her from drowning. But I wasn't that girl anymore, not tonight. And for the first time, I didn't take her fear on as my own. I saw it for what it was, her survival instinct, her curse, but it didn't have to be mine. She walked away slowly, still wringing her hands, and Moxley stepped forward again, this time holding a small envelope. He offered it without a word. "What's this?" I asked, already taking it. "Your father asked me to give it to you," he said, "if things ever got this far." The handwriting on the front was his, my name, just my name. Inside was a note, folded once, and a copy of the original deed transfer, dated well before Delphi and Truett had ever moved in. I read the note first. My dad's voice rang in my head as I took in each word. "You didn't imagine it. You were always the one holding everyone together. I'm sorry they made you doubt it. I should have said this sooner." A noise escaped my throat. Not quite a sob, not quite a laugh. Somewhere in between. I folded the paper back carefully and sat with it in my lap. The voicemail, the note, the blue handkerchief. These weren't just proof. They were pieces of me, of a truth I had carried alone for so long it had nearly erased me. But not anymore. I took a long breath, deeper than any I'd taken all evening. Moxley stood nearby, hands in his pockets. "What do you want to do now?" he asked quietly. I looked at the house. The porch light flickered again, and behind the curtain, I saw shadows moving. Delphi, pacing like she was caged. Like I was the threat now. For years, if someone had asked me that question, I'd have answered, "Keep the peace." Tonight, "I want this to stop," I said. "All of it." I stepped out of the car, the night air rushing against my skin like clarity. Delphi saw me. Her posture changed instantly, shoulders stiff, fingers clutching the doorframe, like she expected me to shout, or plead, or cry. But I wasn't walking toward her to apologize. I wasn't walking toward her to argue either. I walked because I finally understood that avoiding her only fed the fire she lived on. The porch lights hummed above us as I stepped onto the wooden boards. They groaned under my weight, the way old planks do when the night air settles deep inside them. Delphi straightened, arms crossing fast, chin lifting higher than her confidence could support. Her voice came sharp, but the edge quivered. "What now? More lies? More drama?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lean forward. I didn't defend myself the way she wanted me to. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. "No," I said. "What ends tonight is how you treat me, and how you treat my daughter." She let out a loud, mocking laugh, meant for whoever might still be watching from their windows. "Oh, please, Kira. You can drop the innocent act. Everyone knows you twist things when it benefits you." I didn't step back when she moved closer. I stayed still. Behind her, Truett hovered in the doorway, rubbing the back of his neck the way he always did when he was overwhelmed. It took me back, childhood mornings, arguments he didn't want to be in, teachers calling home. Same gesture, same avoidance. And somehow, even with all of that, I felt steady. "Enough," I said quietly. She opened her mouth again, but I reached into my pocket and pulled out my old backup phone. I'd forgotten I even had it until last week, when I cleaned out the glove box. Tonight, I remembered the auto backup feature, and tonight, I needed it. I opened a folder and angled the screen so she, Truett, Moxley, and my mother could see. Messages, dozens of them. Texts from Delphi to Truett, mocking me, accusing me, telling him to keep her under control, promising to shut her down if I ever spoke up. Calling me names I wouldn't repeat in front of my daughter, telling him I was pathetic, predicting I'd never fight back. Delphi lunged for the phone, but I stepped away smoothly, holding it out of reach without raising my hand. Her face drained. Truett's expression crumpled like someone punched the air out of him. "You swore she made all that up," he whispered. You told me she was twisting everything. Delphi spun toward him fast. You always take her side when she plays the victim. You fall for it every time, Truett. I almost laughed at the irony. I had never been allowed a side in this family. Not once. My mother tried to intervene, her voice shaking. Let's calm down. This isn't helping. Delphi pivoted on her so fast, my mother shrank back like she'd been struck. You enabled her, Delphi snapped. You never stood up to your daughter, and now she thinks she can run this family. I stepped between them before my mother could crumble any further. That's enough, I said, my tone cool and flat. You don't talk to her like that. For the first time, Delphi hesitated. Just a pause, but it was there. Then Moxley cleared his throat gently, stepping forward. There's something you all need to see, he said. It concerns the property records. Delphi stiffened. More of her lies? No, he replied calmly. Actual documentation. He explained, slowly and clearly, that several maintenance bills and utilities had been routed through an email that wasn't mine. That someone had approved charges using a signature that didn't match mine. That repeated warnings about property damage had been intercepted. The words hung in the air like a siren no one could ignore. Truett stared at Delphi. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. You told me Kira forgot those bills. You told me she was losing track of things. Delphi's breathing grew fast and shallow. I'm being framed, she insisted. She's trying to destroy us. You think she wouldn't? She's jealous. She shoved past him suddenly, nearly stumbling as she rushed inside. The screen door clapped hard against the frame. For a long second, the whole house went silent. No insults, no excuses, just the hollow quiet that comes before something breaks for good. I walked inside slowly, not chasing her, just refusing to run anymore. The hallway lights buzzed overhead, casting a dull yellow glow over the old carpet. The air smelled like dust and detergent that hadn't been rinsed properly. Delphi was at the end of the hallway, bent over a drawer, throwing papers out like she was digging for gold. Loose sheets floated to the floor. Receipts, envelopes, crumpled notes. Chaos. It was right here, she muttered. I saved everything. I know I did. Her hands trembled as she searched. Panic took over the anger. Truett stood frozen in the doorway behind me, his face blank, as if he was finally seeing the version of his wife everyone else already knew. I took a step closer, my voice steady. You didn't save everything, I said. You hid everything. She stopped. Her shoulders lifted as she inhaled sharply. Then she turned toward me, eyes wide, breath jagged. For the first time, Delphi didn't look furious. She looked cornered and scared. Then, from the bottom of the drawer, she yanked out a thick folder, bent, stuffed, bulging with papers. She held it up like a weapon, clutching it tight to her chest. You want proof? She shouted. Fine, look at what she's really done. The hallway felt smaller, tighter, the air heavier. Like everyone standing there understood, whatever was inside that folder could change everything. In that moment, I realized the truth, waiting inside it, could burn the last bridge this family had, or expose the lies that built it. And once I understood that, something inside me settled. Not peace, just certainty. Delphi's fingers clenched around the thick folder, her breath uneven, her eyes jumping from me to Truett to Moxley, as if she couldn't decide who was the biggest threat. The hallway suddenly felt too narrow for all of us, the ceiling a little too low, the walls closing in with every frantic inhale she took. Then she slammed the folder onto the small table, papers exploding across the wood like shrapnel. Look, she yelled, her voice high and cracking. Proof she's unstable. Proof she can't manage anything. Her words clung to the air, too sharp, too desperate. I reached for the paper closest to me, a therapy referral from years back. Grief counseling, a time when my father had just passed and I didn't know how to breathe without feeling like my chest was caving in. I remembered that version of myself, tender, raw, trying to stay afloat. Seeing it in her hands now, used like ammunition, hit harder than I expected. She hadn't just gone through my things, she went through my history. My stomach tightened, not with shame, but with the cold sting of being violated. Delphi grabbed more pages, waving them wildly. Old debt notices from when I was juggling 2 jobs, medical paperwork from when Yoria was an infant and sick for weeks, my name scribbled shaky from sleep deprivation. "She's always been a mess," Delphi hissed. "She can't make decisions. She needs to be supervised." Truitt's eyes widened as he recognized documents he had never seen, documents he had no right to see. I felt the ache rise, old wounds reopening, but I stood straighter. I'd spent too long letting her version of me run this house. Moxley reached for one of the papers that had drifted toward him. He held it up, examining it carefully before looking at me. "Kira," he said slowly, "did you authorize the release of these records?" I shook my head. He tapped the signature at the bottom. "This isn't your handwriting, and the date is wrong." Delphi froze, completely. That stillness said more than any scream she'd thrown my way tonight. She spun toward the living room suddenly, grabbing more papers as if she could bury the truth under sheer noise. The room was dim, lit only by a single lamp leaning crooked on the end table. Shadows stretched across her face as she hurled more accusations. "You went digging for this," she barked at me. "You want to tear this family apart?" "You broke into my files," I said, following her into the room. "You took things that belonged to me. That's not protecting the family, Delphi. That's violating it." She whipped around. "You don't deserve privacy." Those 5 words landed deep, a truth she'd never dared say out loud until now. Behind me, Truitt finally stepped forward, voice cracking. "Delphi, did you forge her signature? Tell me the truth." She rounded on him, like a cornered animal. "I did it for us. Someone had to protect what we built." "What you built," he echoed, stunned. "By lying? By threatening her?" She glared at him. "You never complained when those lies benefited you." The silence that followed was thick, heavy, and heartbreaking. Then a knock at the front door broke the moment. Not sharp, hesitant. Mrs. Holcomb stepped inside holding her tablet, the way someone carries something fragile. "There's something you all need to see," she said, her voice steady, even gentle. Delphi's entire body went rigid. Mrs. Holcomb pressed play. On the screen appeared footage from 2 weeks ago. Delphi in my garage, digging through boxes marked with my name, ripping open sealed envelopes, smirking to herself. At one point, she held a stack of my mail and said, laughing, "She'll never know." Sable gasped, her hand flying up to her mouth. Truitt looked like the ground had tilted under him. For me, the validation came mixed with grief, the kind you feel when the final piece of a painful puzzle clicks into place. Delphi lunged forward, screaming for the video to be turned off. I moved without thinking, stepping between her and Mrs. Holcomb. Delphi shoved me hard, harder than she probably intended, and I stumbled back, catching myself on the doorway frame. A dull thud echoed through my spine, but the physical sting barely registered compared to everything else inside me. Truitt grabbed Delphi's wrist, fear spilling over now. "Stop," he yelled. "Just stop, Del. This isn't you." But it was her. This had always been her. And as I straightened, I realized the shove wasn't what floored me. It was the truth inside that push. She had never feared me. She feared the day I'd stop shrinking. The fight dragged back into the front yard. The night air slapped against my face, cooler now, almost refreshing after the suffocation inside. Delphi stumbled onto the grass, clutching the folder like a lifeline. Then she threw it, every page scattering across the yard. "Take it," she screamed. "Take all of it! But you're not taking the house." Her voice cracked on the last word, raw and exposed. And there it was, the truth she'd been choking on this whole time. It wasn't the house she was clinging to. It was her grip on this family. Control disguised as entitlement. Manipulation dressed as concern. I watched her shaking, the porch light cutting harsh lines across her face, illuminating every ounce of fear she'd tried to bury. Moxley stepped beside me, his voice dropping low. "Kira, it's time. You need to make your move now." Delphi's head snapped toward us, panic flashing sharp across her features. For once, she didn't have a ready insult or a snide remark. She didn't have anything left to throw. And as I looked at her trembling in that cold, unforgiving light, I knew exactly what my next move had to be. I stepped off the porch and onto the grass, the dew soaking through the thin soles of my shoes. The air felt sharper now, not from the chill, but from the weight of the moment. Delphi stood frozen, fists clenched, jaw tight. The rage that once defined her seemed to be slipping away, replaced by something she didn't know how to wear: fear. "This ends tonight," I said, calm, low, final. She scoffed, a weak, broken sound that barely made it past her lips. Truett watched from the top step, his face pale, unreadable, like he was standing between two versions of himself. The man who let things go, and the brother who should have spoken sooner. Delphi's voice shook. "You think this proves something? That you're better than me?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I nodded once toward Moxley. He stepped back just as a black SUV pulled up quietly along the curb. The doors opened, and two deputies in dark uniforms stepped out. No flashing lights, no sirens, just presence. Delphi's head jerked toward the car. What is this? Who did you call?" I turned to her, eyes steady. "The owner," I said. "Myself, and the sheriff's office." Silence stretched around us, thick and unrelenting. For once, no one rushed in to soften the blow. No one tried to explain it away. One of the officers stepped forward. "We received a report involving unlawful disposal of property, potential harassment, and forgery related to property documents. We're here to ask a few questions." Delphi's mouth opened, then closed. Words tumbled out, chaotic and defensive. "She's trying to steal the house. This is my home. She's always been unstable. Ask anyone." I calmly handed over the folder Moxley had given me earlier. Inside, the original deed transfer with my father's signature, dated long before Delphi or Truett moved in. Delphi lunged, but one officer gently stepped between us, holding her back with a steady hand. "You don't understand," she screamed. "She's manipulating you. She always has." The officer didn't flinch. "Ma'am, we just need to verify a few things." Truett stepped down from the porch slowly, each footfall sounding heavier than the last. He looked at Delphi like he didn't know her anymore. Maybe he didn't. "You forged her signature?" he asked softly. Delphi's eyes darted around wildly. "I only did it because you said you'd never give up this house unless she looked unstable." The world stopped. Just for a second. Truett blinked. "What?" "I did it for us," she yelled. "You said it. You said she'd never push back unless she had a reason to." His face collapsed. "Delphi, you lied. To me. To everyone. You broke into her files. You destroyed what little trust we had." She reached for him, but he stepped away. That simple move cracked something open in her. All I could do was stand there, watching the pieces fall. Moxley quietly handed me one last file. Digital printouts of email logs showing Delphi's attempts to reroute ownership communications to an email address she created using falsified credentials. The officers reviewed it, then turned to her. "Is this your email address?" one asked. She didn't answer, didn't blink. Her lips trembled. That silence was everything. It told the whole story. Delphi dropped to her knees, her sobs ragged and guttural. Her hands covered her face like she could hide from what she'd done. Truitt turned away, hands and fists at his sides. I couldn't tell if he was holding back grief or fury. Probably both. Sable, standing behind him, whispered gently, "Kira, honey, what do you want to do now?" It took me a long moment to answer. "I don't want her arrested," I said quietly, "but she's not staying here tonight." Delphi screamed, "No!" Reaching out toward Truitt, but he didn't move, didn't even look at her. "You need help," he said, his voice breaking, "and you won't get it here." The deputies helped her to her feet. Not rough, not cruel, just firm. She walked back into the house between them, her sobs fading with every step. She was allowed to pack a bag, just enough for the night. There were no cuffs. This wasn't punishment. It was consequence. I stood in the yard and watched her go. The woman who made me feel like a guest in my own life was finally leaving. The porch light flickered once. The house, for all its noise, suddenly felt still. Later, after Delphi was taken for processing and evaluation, Truitt sat on the top step of the porch, elbows on his knees. His expression was hollow. Sable sat next to him, placing one tired hand on his back. "We all failed her," Truitt said, barely audible. "But I failed you more." I didn't answer. There wasn't anything left to say. I stepped toward the door, heart heavy, hand brushing the frame that held my family for decades. The paint was chipped, the wood soft in places, but it was still standing, and so was I. Behind me, Moxley said gently, "Kira, once you walk in now, nothing will ever be the same again." I paused, let the weight of it settle in, and then, slowly, I stepped over the threshold. The front door clicked shut behind me, not loud, just final. Inside, the house sat in silence, like it was waiting to see what I'd do next. The hallway was dim, the air heavier than I remembered. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was trespassing. I didn't feel like a guest in my own story. Truitt was in the living room, elbows resting on his knees, his eyes on the floor. Sable stood behind him, fidgeting with her hands the way she always did when she didn't know where to put her guilt. He looked up. His face was raw, his voice unsteady. "Kara, I'm sorry for all of it." There was something in his tone, something small and shattered, that made him look like the boy I once built blanket forts with, not the man who'd stood by while his wife broke me down. I sat on the edge of the armchair across from him. "Sorry doesn't rebuild trust, Truitt." He nodded slowly. No defense, no protest. "You let her hurt Yorya," I said, "and you didn't believe me." "I know." His voice cracked. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make that right, if you'll let me." I didn't offer a promise. I only gave a small nod, not of forgiveness, but acknowledgement. Sable stepped forward. Her eyes were glossy, but she held my gaze. "I should have stepped in," she said. "I should have defended you." My throat tightened. I had imagined this moment for years, but now that it was here, it didn't feel like vindication. It felt like release. "You were scared too," I said quietly. "But we can't keep doing that. Things have to change." Sable didn't answer right away. She just took a breath like it was the first one she'd allowed herself in hours. We moved outside together. The air had cooled, and the sky held that deep blue shade that comes before dawn. My things, and Yorya's, were still scattered across the yard. Clothes, books, photo frames. What Delphi had thrown out in rage still sat there, exposed. I knelt to gather a box. Neither Truett nor Sable said anything, but they joined me. We worked in silence. The kind of silence that wasn't empty, but full. Of regret, of effort, of something trying to heal. The quiet act of picking up what had been cast aside, together, spoke louder than any apology. Once everything was back inside, we began setting the boxes in the living room. The furniture was pushed slightly off-kilter, as if the house itself had braced for the chaos. I walked through each room slowly. The kitchen still smelled faintly of cinnamon, probably from Sable's tea habit. I touched the counter where Truett and I used to sneak snacks when Mom wasn't looking. The hallway echoed a different energy. That was where the fights happened after Dad passed, where Sable shut doors to avoid hearing them, where I learned silence was sometimes mistaken for peace. In the guest room, the one I helped repaint all those summers ago, the wallpaper was still, peeling in the corners. I ran my fingers along the edge. Even the imperfections had history. Later, we sat at the kitchen table. It was scratched and worn, with one leg slightly shorter than the others. Nothing had ever been level in this house. But now it didn't matter. Truett rubbed his palms together. "We're going to get help," he said. "Emergency counseling for starters. I'll move in with Cousin Joel for now." "And Delphi?" I asked. "She'll get professional support. Before anything else. Before any talk about the marriage. She needs help." I nodded, letting it settle. For once, I didn't have to fight to be heard. "You don't need to carry us anymore," he added. "Not at the cost of yourself." Sable looked across the table at me. Her voice was quiet, hesitant. "Will you stay here?" I looked around. My gaze caught the tiny chip in the corner of the table, the one from when I dropped my first glass of milk, the grooves carved into the wood from school projects, late-night talks, breakdowns, breakthroughs. "I'll stay for a while," I said, "long enough to rebuild the place, and myself." Outside, the wind picked up gently, rustling the trees. In the quiet that followed, Sable hummed, low and soft, a tune I hadn't heard in years. She used to hum it when I couldn't sleep, back when the world felt too loud. Back then, it made me feel small. Now, it made me feel whole. A few hours passed like that, quiet, still, restoring. When I finally stepped out onto the porch again, the sky had begun to pale. That soft, early light that signals morning's first breath washed across the horizon. Birds stirred. The world hadn't stopped spinning. It had just paused long enough for me to catch up. I leaned against the railing, drawing in the crisp air. Behind me, bare feet patted softly on the floor. "Mom!" Yora's voice was groggy. I turned. She stood in the doorway, her hair messy, her eyes wide. She looked so much like me at that age, hopeful but cautious. "Are we safe now?" she whispered. I held out my arms and she walked straight into them. "We're safe," I said, "and we're done shrinking." The sun crept up slowly, inch by inch. The warmth didn't hit right away, but I knew it was coming. And as I stood there, my arms around my daughter, I let my mind trace the whole journey. The night I was thrown out, the doubt, the humiliation, the shame, the quiet phone call that flipped the balance, the truth that refused to stay buried. And this, the moment I chose myself, not because someone gave me permission, but because I didn't need it anymore. As the first beam of light hit the roof, I closed my eyes. The house, and my life, finally belonged to me in every way that mattered.